Hi, and welcome to the Collective Impact Podcast. A collective impact is when communities collaborate, share resources, and learn together in a structured way to create equity-enhancing change. I'm Mina Yildiz, and I founded this podcast to uplift the stories of historically marginalized groups and people within the Madison, Wisconsin community, and to celebrate their work in helping create a better world. I invite listeners to pay attention to how systems of oppression impact people's experiences and to be aware of how these systems may affect your life or the people around you. I hope this podcast can inspire listeners to share their own stories, nurture their passions, and become a part of creating systems-level change. Well, thank you for being here with me today, Justice. Although we already know each other, I thought that we could do a short introduction and a little icebreaker. So just, your name, your age, pronouns, and your affiliation with UW-Madison.
All right. My name is Justice Castañeda. I am use the he series pronouns. Uh, my age, I'm 42 years old. I'm technically a graduate student finishing my dissertation at the University of Wisconsin at Madison, but see how that goes. No.
All right. And then is there a quote or phrase or saying that you have that has any personal meaning to you? And then why?
Yeah, life is too short for whole wheat pasta.
It's true.
Uh,
Thought of it that way.
what's that?
Never thought of it that way. I have a lot of dietary restrictions, so I'm going to use that one.
No, a lot of people. Yeah, no. I think if that's one of them, but I do have this other thing that I kind of I'm sitting here thinking about a few of them. I mean, one of them I think is that the plan is nothing more than the most natural and normal point of demarcation from any current trajectory. It's never meant to be followed because the conditions under which a plan is made are never constant. And so if you make a plan success beholden to conditions that were extant at the time of the plan being made, you're inevitably setting yourself up for failure.
Yeah.
It's a kind of a mouthful, but I mean, the whole thing, I think there's some meaning to it.
Yeah. And quotes are always really meaningful for me, and I always reflect on them when things get hard. So I think it's great to have those. Um, so just to start off the interview, I wanted to touch on your childhood, your upbringing, adolescence to adulthood, and just tell me a little bit about it, and then we can go into the questions for that.
Uh, well, where where to start? Where would you like me to start? How do you want me to start? Like,
Yeah.
what's the best way to frame it? Just I mean, that's it's just a lot, and
Yeah.
I think one of the Achilles of being older, every year you think a little bit more, and you put a lot of things into context, and you add filler where things kind of were linear at one point, but then you start to understand a lot of the things that went into to support the foundation, to support how you were thinking or why you were feeling that way. So
Mhm.
I grew up here in Madison. I'm from Madison. I was born here, born at home, 23 North Ingersoll Street. My father, he was a college. Both my parents were university students at the time. My dad, neither of them finished college, but both of them were kind of a first year thing. And my dad was a musician. My mother actually was kind of, it wasn't, man, sounds bad already, but like it wasn't necessarily like they were in love or anything. I wasn't like a product of a marriage. um, and so I didn't really know my father much when I was a kid. I lived with my mother. We kind of, did the low income housing tour, Madison, Wisconsin, bouncing around from this place to that place, respite centers and shelters and such. And, you know, then I don't know, my mother disappeared when I was when I was 8 years old, and ended up through a roundabout way, ended up with my father for a couple of years. And then I kind of moved out on my own when I was 13 years old. I've been out on my own since.
Thank you for sharing that. Um,
Sorry, that was heavy. Here, I'm gonna get real quick. Mina, I'm gonna real quick grab some coffee. It'll take me 2 seconds, all right?
okay, see you soon.
Sorry about that.
No worries. Welcome back.
Yeah.
So just to resume off where we left off, is there like a part of your childhood that you feel the most grateful to have gone through and that contributed to, your current life journey?
Um, I think there's always kind of a dichotomy, right? Like, because I'm here, I feel like there's always lessons to be learned, and there's a lot that I learned having to deal with whatever I had to deal with. I think I was, for my father's shortcomings, my mother, start with her for her shortcomings. She did a couple things for me. She taught me how to read at a really young age. And so I could read by the time I was 4 years old, and I kind of became a voracious reader. Um, but the kind of the secondary part of that was my mother. She was technically a journalism student, and my father, while not academically engaged really as a student, he was a mecha. He's a machista, so his circle, even as kind of a local musician, was kind of artists and intellectuals. And I think, again, despite him not being present for a lot of that, for me as a kid, he, I do feel very fortunate for that, right? Like, there's a lot to be said about being surrounded by the arts and around thinkers. And so I feel really lucky for that.
Yeah, creativity in all spheres is very inspiring, and I know reading
Right.
gives me a lot of solace too. So wonderful that you're able to uh, that was to happen. But the next part is there anything that you feel like you regret having gone through, or you wish something that you may have done differently?
Yeah, I think a lot of it, what I'm saying? Like, I saw stuff, my childhood was not appropriate for children, what I'm saying? And I saw a lot of things as a young kid, and did a lot of things as an adolescent that were I mean, to say that it's inappropriate for kids is like such an understatement. It just was some very horrific stuff that, I've witnessed in my life that has left a very lasting impact on me, and a footprint, in terms of everything about me. It's affected me severely. So, I think that stuff is really hard. I think spending a lot of time really, it shaped me in a way, but because it kind of gave me a sense of who I needed to be as a human being on this planet. But
Yeah. Do you feel that
all of that pain is very real and very raw, and it's still, you know,
do you feel that pain or the experiences that you've been through, even if they were regretful, have kind of helped shape your, passions and, interest in social change at all? Did they have any?
yeah, I mean, a lot of it, like, I think not just me, I think in hindsight, thinking a lot about the people, the conditions, the environment, the reasons, what I'm saying? Like, what are the root causes? What are the reasons why I'm going through these things? What were the things that were affecting, or the inputs that shaped my mother's experience or my father's experience, our experience, my friends, definitely. When I think about, a lot of my friends growing up are dead, man, or have that zombie syndrome where they're dead and their body hasn't got the memo. But more and more of them are dead, and and a lot of them are locked up, in prison. And I think a lot about, or in and out of jail, that's what I mean about that zombie syndrome. Um, I I think a lot about, it's not that they never had a chance or that it was deterministic, but like in a way, there's so many of them who like I knew how this was going to shake out for them when if I look back into everything that was happening with us in, kindergarten, first, second grade. Uh, it, Again, it's not to say that it's deterministic, but the die was cast, right? Like these kids, they never really had a fair shot, and it was inevitable. And the interventions or the spaces that we looked for educational interventions and support, it just was non-existent in terms of what the kids needed, And so, to your point, yeah, I think a lot of it has fueled a lot of my fire, my passion, and the work that I do, the work that I aspire to do.
Yeah, and that actually brings me right to the next part, which would be, education, your background and connections. So did you have that similar kind of experience then with the education system when you were growing up too?
So, so there's a couple things, right? So let's go back to the two things before. I said I was very appreciative of my mother teaching me how to read at a young age, and then my father for surrounding me with kind of these intellectual type. I though both those things pay dividends over time, because I think being in school and being able to read and not having to deal with literacy, uh, again, not relying completely on, this is not a novel concept. This has been well established in research, but being able to have what is considered extracurricular reading or engagement with literacy outside of school is so necessary. And so one of the places that you see significant gaps is where you have some students who the extent to which they're exposed to reading or to literacy or to a lot of your core curricular activities is while they're in school. And so what you look at is the hours that are spent on curricular or supportive activities outside of school. And there's huge disparities. And so I think the fact that I was exposed to a lot of this stuff, and it was in I should also say that my well, my father was a knucklehead. His mother was the first Mexican, or one of the first Mexican people, immigrants born. She wouldn't be an immigrant. First Mexican Americans born in Racine, Wisconsin, and one of the, of the first that are on record is born in the state. And my grandmother has a master's degree in education policy from UW Whitewater. I think about that a lot because at the time, during that era, the likelihood of women being accepted or being able to access higher education at all was very, very slim, right? Like that was a very low chance that you were able to engage in that. And here you had a Mexican woman, Mexican American, I would say Chicana, but she would never call herself that. But you have a Mexican American woman who is not only going to college and getting advanced degrees. All of her kids, all 9 of them, stepped foot on a college campus. Now, only 4 of them finished, but all 5 of them, the 5 that didn't, they have their own stories, and they did. So I say that to say, and on my dad's cousins, I have, my dad's first cousin, he has a first cousin who, PhD in psychology, a first cousin who's a judge. So the institution of education was not foreign to me. It wasn't something that was totally, you know what I'm saying, like totally absent from my psyche and my thought processes. So I think that that unto itself was a unique, it's a type of privilege, right? Even though I wasn't able to operationalize that until much later in my life. Um, but I tested well. I was always a good tester, and um, we know now that during that era, especially when it came to math, but during that era, so much of every core curriculum was really assessing, part of it, what I would call the economic rent to do well in your core curriculum was literacy and being able to, because so many of like the math problems, especially some of the longer problems when you would get on those tests were word problems, and being able to have word association was so important. And so even though it technically was supposed to be testing the degree to which you had math acumen, a lot of what it's testing, or it's, before you can get to the math part, you got to be able to test whether you can read the problem. And so I think I was a very accelerated advanced reader.
Yeah.
And so I think that gave me a lot in terms of mileage. I was academically, I won like a math meet in fifth grade or fourth grade. I was like doing a lot of this stuff, even though I was dealing with a lot of other stuff at home. I always did well, at least in elementary school. It wasn't until I didn't start dropping off until I hit middle school. And then when I moved out on my own, like I think I only went to a total like maybe a month or two of seventh grade, for instance. Like I didn't even go. And so, I started doing worse. I barely graduated high school. I graduated 1.46 GPA out of Madison East. I graduated by the skin of my teeth, but it it was kind of, when you talk to, I've been able to talk to educators or administrators that I knew or that, were around me as a kid. Um, I was politically engaged, you know what I'm saying? So even though I knew, I wasn't doing well in school, I was very aware of who I was politically and about a lot of things that were happening. And so, throughout high school, I was involved in something called the Multicultural Teen Council, which I was the youngest person. I actually met these folks and pretty much trying to think about now before I went to jail, but like I was like the outlier as a young kid who was doing this like as an outlet, like as an artistic outlet or expression, whereas all the other kids that were in it were juniors and seniors who were highly academically inclined and were doing this work because they wanted to get into college or because they needed extracurriculars. And so being around them, so we would go to high schools and just do presentations around kind of southern Wisconsin around things like interracial dating, racism, around LGBTQ, about same-sex relationships. So that stuff at the time is so interesting because, a lot of the same things that we were identifying and noticing, I just feel like time, there's the eternal recurrence of the same, whereas a lot of the same things that we saw as being problematic about the city or the county, then they're still there now. So, I will say that, I was engaged politically. I had a political consciousness, but I didn't, you know,
Yeah, I can see how your background with your education and how that was engraved in your family and became a big part of your life, down the road as well. And I think it's really amazing that you're able to find that political, ambitions and passions and be able to express that in a creative way. Um, so, going out like from there, what is your education background once you kind of identified that political.
So I barely graduated high school. I started going to MATC, or what they call Madison College now, right after high school. I don't know why. I wasn't ready. It was kind of a wasted. I mean, whatever. Nothing is wasted in terms of experience, but I spent a semester getting like D's and F's. And the craziest part of that is that I went back for a second semester and got more D's and F's, and a lot of it was, it's, the stuff that we take for granted, the stuff that we know that so much of school is having the conditions or having the mindset or having the structure or focus to be able to do it. And so a lot of that comes back to kind of that hierarchy of needs thing, right? So like, do you have basic needs? Do you have all these things figured out so that you can actually engage in school in a way that you're going to get a return for the time that you're spending in that space? And I absolutely had not. If anything, it had gotten worse, right? Like I was doing, worse as an adult in terms of having access to basic needs than I was able to do as a kid. And so, yeah, that was rough, man. And so I was working construction after that. I was a sheet metal worker for a couple of years doing tinning and sheet metal, construction outfits, and then did some roofing. At that point, a lot of the people that I grew up with, that's when everyone started to really, I had a couple of friends get killed. And I had a couple folks that were kind of within our circle get killed. And a lot of people around me started going to prison. And so like kind of by the skin of my teeth, and I don't really know, I know how I ended up at the recruiting office, but I don't remember exactly. I don't know. It's so interesting. I mean, these things, life on some level is like these pivots on the edge of a razor. Like I don't know what compelled me completely to just get out of here, but I knew I needed to get out of here. And so when I was 20 years old, I enlisted in the Marine Corps, and which was really interesting. And I use that, in terms of education, I think it's hard more and more because there's so few people who have military experience who are in the workforce, or at least in positions of HR hiring. The people in terms of operationalizing this, it can be very difficult, but while there is a professional and probably a personal component to the military in that you're learning how to be an adult, it's giving you a sense of structure or a sense of infrastructure that you can build off of to develop professional skills. And a lot of it's the intangibles, right? Like punctuality, responsibility, accountability, tact. A lot of the things, and trust me, in 20 years of management, I've never, I've never seen, and I've been to, we'll talk about this in a second, but like I've been to graduate schools that are around organizational management, leadership. I have multiple certificates. I've been in a directorial or a managerial position for over 15 years. If you include the military, for 20 years, I've been doing management of some sort. And there is nothing like it in terms of teaching people and how to both self-govern, but also how to manage other people. And a lot of the things they're teaching you, those intangibles, I think are really important. Understanding that as a professional skill set, but the academic space in that the military is okay. The segue there is that the military, Marine Corps in particular, is very much a school. The whole time you're there, you're going to schools. You're training. You're always going to school. You're always being assessed, evaluated, training. So growth is endemic to the work. So it's kind of, there's no stagnation. You're always going to a training, going to a school, going to a training, going to a school. So it taught me how to learn, I guess, in a way, or gave me a space that I could develop how to learn, how to be self-taught. So I started, again, I barely graduated high school. And so, I was like, I need to get, a degree. But also at the time, when I first got in the military, I was sober. It was probably the first time, since adolescence, since I was like 12, that I had been, except for when I was locked up, but I was completely sober and I wasn't drinking or doing any drugs or, I mean, I was never really into hard drugs, but I used to smoke a lot of weed and as a kid. And I drank a lot, and so all of a sudden I'm in this space where I was sober, where I had, in essence, when you think about your basic Geneva Conventions rights, where you're eating 3 meals a day, where you have access to correspondence, to religious services, to hygiene. For a lot of kids, the first time that we find that is in jail. And so you get this thing where the most socially toxic space is physically one of the more healthier spaces that you'll ever get to. So the military, it is that, right? It's a place where you don't have to, it's like if you have to spend 90% of all your energy trying to access basic needs, what the Marine Corps says is, look, you don't have to worry about that anymore. We have that covered. So now you have all you got to do is focus on this one thing, and you can use all that other energy to do whatever you want. And so I started, dabbling again. I had never gotten good responses from academic spaces. I kind of felt like, being sober in the Marine Corps, I needed to figure out what to do with my time. So I would either go to the gym. It's the healthiest by far that I've ever been. I would go to the gym and then I would just go to school. And so I started off by taking like one, your lower division writing class, you know what I'm saying? And got an A. And I was like, yo, that's cool. Got an A. I never got an A before. And so I would take another class. And, you got time, you got 4 years, your enlistment's 4 years. And so kind of taking one class at a time and getting an A in it, just focusing on one class. And then after, a few of those, I started taking two classes. And then all of a sudden, so the military, another thing is that tuition assistance is free. And so you can just go to school so long as you get C's or better. You can just go to school. And I just became kind of like a education junkie where I was just taking classes at this point. I don't know if it even is relevant anymore to people, but the reference I always say is like the Matrix, where the guy, all of a sudden everything slowed down and then you could just see everything. And so I started taking like astronomy and astrology and physics and calculus. I just started taking all these classes, just everything. I took mythology. I was taking like random histories of different, just because I could, because it was free. And so I was taking at some point 3 or 4 classes a term. And it was kind of a trip, man. So I did that, ended up going to war, came back, actually tried to get out of the military. And this is still in the education stuff, that your question, but I came back to Madison briefly. And well, I had taken all these classes and I had 2 associates. I didn't have a degree, an actual 4-year degree at that time. And so I think that was the first time that I just hit home, like in a very real and raw way, that like all those commercials about how employers care at all about you being a veteran, that was all not true. And because nobody's a veteran. So like nobody, they don't really value it because nobody is it. So I came back here and couldn't get a job because I didn't have a degree, and I was like, so the saying, I was like, all right, even though I have 4 years of military service and experience managing people, and like, it didn't matter. And so I ended up re-enlisting, staying in the military for another 4 years. But at that point, I knew that like there was no way, I need to not go to school just random potpourri. I was going to school to play Jeopardy, what I'm saying, where I just knew a lot of things about random things. So I started honing it in and, focusing on getting the lower divisions knocked out and then, trying to figure out what was the next step. I had a really good boss talked me into getting out of the military and finishing school. So ended up going to the University of California at San Diego, where I finished my undergraduate degree. It was strikingly easy at that point. I was 27 or 28 or something, and college at that point was so, when you think about it, like so much that you had to control for adolescence, and then the fact that I understood basic needs acquisition and didn't have to worry about that, like all of a sudden school became really easy. And so I got straight in. I mean, basically from the time I started going to school in the military until I got to grad school, I got straight A's. There was a couple exceptions where I got B plus, but in general, like overall, I think I graduated from UC San Diego with a 3.9 something. And I was teaching at the time, so I just after the military, after undergrad, I started teaching. Got my undergraduate degree in urban studies and planning with a minor in education policy.
Mhm.
And I started teaching at a continuation high school, teaching algebra as a teacher's assistant, teaching algebra and English in these two classes in a project-based learning environment. And I had a really good advisor there mentor who kind of put his arms around me and metaphorically and just asked her about grad school. And I had never really thought about graduate school. I mean, as a kid, I was kind of a gangbanger, so like I never really thought about school in general. So he taught me, so I just applied to all these schools, and it was probably the most surreal experience. I think getting into undergrad was a thing, but when I applied to grad school and I got accepted to like Brown and NYU and Columbia and Harvard and Stanford, and it was just kind of a trip, man. And Wisconsin, all these things. I got accepted here. I got accepted. It was kind of weird. And so I ended up going to grad school at Stanford University for education policy, organizational leadership. It was a good time, met good people. I mean, it was a lot of the experiences you learn are a lot of, what you'll find this too is that, I don't know, maybe you won't. For me, the areas that I struggled in school are generally speaking where I learned the most. And
Mhm.
the places that I found serious contradictions, again, were those junctions or opportunities for learning or for uh, growth. And so I
At those universities.
realized that schools of ed, they don't really teach education so much as they teach learning. Ended up applying and got into the Massachusetts Institute of Technology for urban studies and it was for planning. What was the program? Department of Urban Studies and Planning, but my focus was in housing policy, economic development, and industrial relations, which is kind of an applied economics as it pertains to housing and land use, is what I would say. Finished that, did a bunch of work in and around that. It was a bunch of stuff. I mean, there's all these concurrent narratives that were kind of happening. One thing was I was focusing on school, trying to finish this and, soaking all that up. And then also through some of the studio work had run into community health, specifically asthma. And so I didn't really understand a lot of the technical component of how the brain, like cognition and like the way that stress, like I understood social toxicity, and I understood that children who are exposed to violence are going to have a harder time navigating conventional educational environments. But I didn't understand it at the level that I wanted to. And so I ended up getting a fellowship. A couple things happened. I got hired by PolicyLink, think tank in Oakland, to work on what became the My Brother's Keeper initiative for the White House. So it was looking at, so the Obama administration was doing a lot of thinking around, trying to figure out, how do you lift up what works? And if they were trying to do some things to address the educational, economic outcomes for boys and men of color, what would that look like? So was on that team, um, working at a middle school in Oakland at the time, doing some math curriculum design for a friend of mine who was the principal there. And then I got into a fellowship, a postgraduate fellowship at the medical school at UC San Francisco, where I could really focus on the clinical and kind of the more nuanced parts of stress and the way that stress affected immunoregulatory function or your immune system, and how it affected cognitive development in adolescence. And so the way that stress and trauma, not only how it impacts or how it affects learning and growth, but also how to mitigate it and strategies for thinking around, like, all right, if I know that a child is dealing with these things, what's the best environment or what's the best way to work with them? So did that, took some time after the fellowship. I was gonna finish my PhD at the time. I think I took some time off just to kind of figure out what I wanted to be doing. At that point, I'm like 35 or whatever, and I kind of felt like, I'd been in school for a bit, 36 maybe, and so I was gonna move. Well, I ended up moving back to Boston, was working in Boston, and then was gonna move back to Oakland, and the job at Commonwealth came up, but then also an opportunity to come back here and finish my PhD. And I think that brings us current. That's the education answer.
Yeah.
I finished that fellowship at the medical school.
That fellowship sounds really interesting, especially with someone with the compromised immune system. It's those connections I didn't know. So thank you for sharing that, and your background and what you learned, and all of the things that you've been a part of. So I can see how your education was huge sparkers and precursors to your work now. How would you define social change? What does it mean to you? How do you see yourself a part of it?
So as I'm sitting here, at 9:55 in the morning on a Monday, I will say change is a constant, right? Like, it's one of the only constants. Everything is changing. From or you are your age, your brain, by the time you go to sleep tonight, your brain will have changed significantly. You know what I'm saying? Like, you will have grown, significantly in today. So like it's gonna change. Change is a constant. It's gonna happen. I think change and positive change are different. Constructive or productive change, like all those things, I think are what we're getting at here, right? And I think people sometimes conflate change with growth, or change with the evolution. I don't think that those things are necessarily synergistic, or I don't think that they're antithetical to one another, but I don't think that they're the same thing. And I think that's important for people to understand, is that they're not. So I would just say that you're trying to make lives better. I think about this a lot, is like, how do you create spaces or neighborhoods, or encourage the growth or the development of neighborhoods or spaces where people can fall in love. And it doesn't have to be like with the person. It could be reading or writing or running or gardening or cooking or whatever. But what that feeling is, right? Like, in a very bell hooks way, like the idea of love is a construct, and places where, and to think about what the artifactual infrastructure has to look like for someone to really negotiate and engage in absolute love, and to think about it that way. And if people are operating in that way, then to me, that's that space where you see that growth that I'm talking about.
Yeah. What are those emotions that are invoked when you are a part of these social change movements, or what is it that, really fuels that passion for you?
Uh, I wish it was I think for me, I mean, honestly, it's just that a lot of my friends are dead. Like a lot of it is very, in a way, I think this is I would say a critique, and this is a challenge that I have, is that this isn't the work is consuming in a way, and like I've been to war, right? Like that's like a real thing. It's like happening. You know what I'm saying? The United States' involvement in other countries' political and economic systems is part of our pursuits or endeavors in social policy or foreign policy. The manifestation of that is in many cases war. You know what I'm saying? And whether it's us directly or if it's us involved in covertly, or however we're doing this. And the wars sometimes that we think about are not necessarily the ones that are declared. A lot of things. So my personal opinion, this is my personal opinion, is a lot of politics, for instance, around let's say women's bodies. It's not really, for instance, that anyone is anti-abortion, for instance. Not to start off with such a light topic, but like when you think about all the constructs and all the things that actually lead into the occurrence of a woman having to make that decision there's just a lot of other things that if you have those infrastructures in place, you can do a lot in terms of actually preventing that occurrence from ever existing. So if I have comprehensive medical, like all these other things in terms of valuation of women, you actually would reduce so you're not really anti-abortion per se, you're just kind of anti-woman. And I would say that for the United States, in terms of the way that we engage with other countries, like we're not really anti-immigration, we're kind of anti-immigrant. And so it's not like we really, if you think about how we operate in these other places, it's like, yeah, whatever you're doing down there in terms of disruption, in terms of volatility, in terms of exploitation, in terms of all of these other things, as part of your natural foreign policy, it holds that a lot of that could very plausibly or probably result in people being like, you know what, we got to get the hell out of here. And so they roll out and then they come here and then we treat them like boot camp because we're like, nah, we need it, So again, all that to say is a lot of what drives me is my experiences with pain and a lot of these other things, which I don't know is always the healthiest endeavor, right? Like, I don't know if that's the healthiest way to go about a lot of this work. I think for me, it becomes, I don't know what else I could do right now. Like, there's not a whole lot else for me until war is over or until this stuff is, until we are in that space where we have made righteous retributions to those, to the souls, the bodies, and the lives of the dispossessed. I don't know what else to do today. And as soon as we have done all that, I'll figure it out, and then maybe I'll go out and I don't know, design shoes or something, And I don't know that these things are exclusive. I just know for me, it becomes this matter of I see all this, I've done all this, I've watched all of it, I've been part of so much of this stuff in different levels. I don't know what else to do.
Yeah, I think pain can be very powerful, even if it is really difficult to deal with. It is a huge. Everything has a starting point, and I think that all your experiences has really showed your growth and the story. Thank you for sharing all of that. You did mention a little bit about Commonwealth development. So you are the executive director. Can you tell me a little bit about what Commonwealth does and like your role in it and how that kind of became to be?
Yeah, Commonwealth was created in 1979 as kind of the culmination of a number of community meetings and events stemming out of a response to violence in a neighborhood. And so the thinking was, if we want to address violence, we're going to need a number of things in place to do this. And a host of them fell under what are the auspices today of Commonwealth development, but I don't think they were thinking about it at the time. I mean, but one of them is you address it through low-income housing, creating healthy housing for families and residents. Second thing is you create an economy so that there's an economy in, an economic growth and presence in an area. And then part of that is going to be hiring people to work in that economy. So making sure that the jobs and not just the lowest entry, but all the jobs in the area that are being created are accessible to the children and to the people that live in the area, right? And so you have to kind of concurrently or synergistically develop a healthy ecosystem for jobs, and while also training people. Yeah. And then, I think we've sprouted, we started doing a lot of, we've kind of taken all that, and we did it well for a long time. We bought, houses, we created houses, and we created the incubators, and we did a lot of this stuff here. I don't think we understood how fast. So again, when you're thinking about land use or development of neighborhoods, 20 years is kind of your first temporal metric. That's your first benchmark, right? Like these are 20-year increments. 20 years at year zero seems like a long time, and then you go to work, right? You look at your hands, you look at your family, you look at your hands, you look at your family, you look at your hands one more time, and then you go to work. And then you realize that 20 years is no time at all. And so I think that, managing or the growth or expectations or the demand versus our capacity for growth was an interesting. I think that that's one place that I don't want to call it a shortcoming. I just don't think they understood how that was going to happen. And so, we've expanded. In 91, we started working in the high school, supporting youth at East High School. And then in the aughts, we expanded to all 4 high schools, and we do work in all 4 of the high schools today. And, we've expanded this to have structured experiential learning internships. I think, something you're seeing, we could talk about this a different time, but, the struggles and the challenges with trying to take on new endeavors, recognizing the demand, having kind of an all-purpose entity that can start things or be kind of a local think tank around issues pertaining to community development is such a luxury for a city. Whether or not it takes off, I mean, there's been a number of things ranging from, as you're aware of, the Youth Advisory Board with Chief of Police to the Madison Recycling Program. Like all these things were the brainchild of Commonwealth development and have been, part of our thinking and part of what we do for a long time. And so anyway, that's kind of, I mean, I said that in a roundabout way. I don't think I've ever muddled up the definition of Commonwealth so badly as I just did. But that's what we are. We focus on, you can read our mission, but in essence, we do the general areas are equitable economic development, healthy housing, and real estate development of housing that is for human beings. And then the community building, right? And really thinking about sustainable land use as part of the development of community. And all of that is under the broader umbrella of violence prevention. I mean, that's what we are. That's what we've always been. That's what we do. We are a violence prevention initiative organization that addresses violence through that root cause, or by, we encourage the presence and prevalence of love for space as a way to think about violence prevention over time. And my job, in a way, the executive director at an organization, one of the things, it's an interesting job. It's more administrative than anything. And in a way, you represent the company or you represent the enterprise. You need to make sure that this thing exists beyond you and anyone else there. And so it asks you to kind of suspend your own personal things. I mean, to me, and it's epitome, and you have to be thinking about that, but you also have to recognize that to get, to keep it going, you have to take care of the people there. And so you have very limited resources to do a lot of things, and you have to manage the space and its money in a way that is conducive or that allows for ongoing growth for the organization's mission, but also supporting people here. And it's hard, right? Like that part of it, because you got people with different ideas, and you want to support their ideas as much as possible, but you also realize that they're probably not going to be here to see those ideas through fruition. And this is what you run into with a lot of these organizations. Um, yeah.
Yeah, the work that Commonwealth Development is, very broad and very important for the community, and being able to see it kind of come alive in all those, ways. Even in my time when I was working at Commonwealth, it was really inspiring to be around that, and it was a huge inspiration too to kind of pursue my own social work. So I was, or social change work, and I was actually going to ask you, what advice do you have to anyone who aspires to change the community or the world for the better, or your own, goals and hopes for social change as a whole?
My first thing is follow your passion. Be passionate, you know what I'm saying? I guess, and the same thing I would say is fall in love a lot, and fall in love a lot. I think the other thing is be wrong, be lazy, and be irrelevant. And I'll send you an article about that. I don't know if I've ever sent it to you, but be wrong and be all right with that. Like I think there's so many people out here trying to prove that they're right. They end up being boring because you end up being safe, like you go to what's safe, what's done, because, and this is a challenge we have right now. I think the grading system, the cost of education, all these things are impediments to actual learning. Because especially as you get into grad school, like people become so fixated on the GPA and what these things mean, that you're going to go towards the things that you're good at, and it's kind of conducive to that. Like that's what it does. It wants you to gravitate where, like, really you want folks to be testing, trying things out. Like that's where you find growth, right? Like look at in grad school, I got straight A's, except I got like my first C's I've ever gotten in any academic environment. I got in grad school, and I got them in, what was it, program evaluation, believe it or not, in the history of higher education. Oh no, the history of school reform. And then when I first took calculus-based economics. Now, I don't think that any of that reflects my intellect or intelligence. There's a story behind each one of those things, and that I could tell in terms of the conversation. The guy who I took the history of school reform, he became a mentor and a friend. I took his classes. He was a very difficult grader, and he taught me how to write. And I took his class. I worked with him the entire time I was in that program. I took a class with him every quarter, Stanford, so it's a quarter system. And I learned more about me through that process in terms of the way that I was thinking and writing than in anything else. In the program evaluation class and Porteous at Stanford, the whole thing was that I was given a program that I thought was horrible, and it was like a real-time thing, and it was this NGO that was doing some work, and I don't remember where, but I thought that their whole model was imperialistic and problematic. And so I wrote this kind of damning critique of the organization and its thinking as part of my ongoing evaluation. And I turned in my draft, and she was like, this isn't what you need to be doing, is lifting. And I was like, no, I don't want to lift this, like this is jacked, And she was like, well, I'm not going to give you a good grade if you turn this in. So I doubled down, I turned it in. And she gave me a C, and we're fine. We looked at each other in the eyes and we both went our separate ways. And so what? Then so what? And then the economics thing, that was just really the first time I was taking spatial statistics out. MIT was very difficult. It was hard in general. I would say the Marine Corps and MIT, like those are two of the hardest things, like in terms of challenge that I've ever experienced in my life. And it was just difficult. And I struggled, you know what I'm saying? Like I struggled learning it. It was very hard. And that first semester, where I'm in here trying to do all this stuff and get acclimated and, it was difficult. And so I got that one, and I say that to say I learned more. I know so much. I remember those courses. I remember everything about them. To this day, I took that economic stuff and I kept going with it. Like I took the same guy, Frank Levy's, he's famous economist, and I studied him the whole time I was in that program, right? And I worked with him, and I made sure I went back until I got an A. I'm coming back for another economics, some other economics. So coming in there, and I'm just going to keep doing this. And so I say that to say, it's so hard, right? Like it feels so zero sum. And when we're, it's this cliche thing that, you always hear older people telling you this about, you're young and you got all this time and all this stuff. And it's always like blah, 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 blah. Because when you're in the moment, it doesn't feel that way and it doesn't help us. But being able to, did I ever tell you about jumping out of airplanes?
No, I don't recall that.
I'll do it in 27 seconds. So when you learn how to jump out of an airplane in the military, it's not like tandem jumping. You don't jump with someone else. You jump by yourself the first time. So you spend basically 3.5 weeks just learning the two things you learn. The first thing that they need to teach you is how to get out of the plane. Once you get out of the plane, you will land. And so like that's everything is getting out of the plane. And like, trust me, for the human mind, like everything apart, you're like, hey man, you're crazy. The mind is telling you, do not jump out of an airplane. It turns out that sounds like a horrible idea. That's not a good way to spend my Tuesday. So the other part, then they spend 3 weeks learning that. You spend a week how to land, and then if you can learn those two things, then everything else. So the day you get to the thing, it's like it's in Georgia. It was hot. It's like it's September, around Labor Day of in Georgia, right? Southern Georgia. You got to go to the hangar to get picked up. You got to get there like 4:45, and they put you in this parachute and they tighten it all up. They tell you don't eat or drink anything really because you can't take it off. Once they put that thing on, there's no bathrooms. Now this thing is so heavy, it's digging in your back. It's like having an 80-pound backpack, and you can't do anything with it. So people are like bending over, trying to do everything they can to shift the weight of this pack off their body. And and then it's hot, and so the planes, you find out that the planes it's not like an airport. They don't come like at 2:30 in the afternoon. There's a 2:30 and a 1, like that's not how it works. They're reservists who are flying from all over the country, and they come in there just as part of their practice, and they'll land. So they just come when they come, and so you kind of like you're waiting and waiting. And that plane, we got there at 5. Plane didn't come till 1:30 in the afternoon, and you go before you get on the plane. They read you your rights. Mm-hmm. Because once you get on that plane, you have to jump by law because it endangers everybody if you hesitate at the door. So they read you your rights. They tell you that they will render you unconscious and throw you out of that plane. And you got to say, like, this is your last chance. You know what I'm saying? So if you're not going to jump, don't get on that plane. So you get on there, it's rickety. You're on a rickety plane. You're flying up there. It's so loud. You're still sitting there miserably, this backpack. You get up there in the air. You get the yellow light because it's red light. The whole time it means sit down. Yellow light means stand up. You stand up, and then you look at the person in front of you. Make sure you check their stuff. Make sure their stuff is good. Someone's checking your stuff. You got about 30 seconds, and then the door pops open. Boom. Now you hear that the door is open. You know what I'm saying? You're over here like you're on this plane. There's a door open on the plane, and you're sitting here like, well, that's interesting. And Then the green light goes, and then it's time to go, and you get in front of a door. You're on an airplane. You get in front of a door, and you gotta just, you kick out, you close your eyes, you hold your breath, and you count to 4, and you just look up. And all of a sudden the weight is gone because the canopy just, went up, and everything is dead silent because you're just suspended in the air at that moment. And you're just hanging there on the horizon. You're just looking at the horizon, at the Alabama sun, and you're just seeing this because you jump in Georgia, you actually jump into Alabama. And it's the most peaceful thing. And you asked me a quote. I'm going to give you the quote. I gave you the wrong quote. I'll give you the quote. I just remember my quote.
That actually goes with
realize
people.
At that moment, that you're gonna land. That's the only thing that's guaranteed. And so much of it is getting out of the plane, right? Like, you got to get out of the plane and getting your mind in the right space that, like, I'm gonna get out of the plane. Let's just do it. And so be good to the people you meet. You meet good people, make more people laugh than you do cry. So much as you're able, approach every situation absent of self-interest. And at the end of the day, if and when gravity doesn't take care of the rest, you find a way to love them even when they can't take a joke. And I guess that would be the quote.
Thank you so much for your time. This was the Collective Impact Podcast. To stay on top of any updates or to learn more about who we are and what we do, please check out our website, which will be linked to whatever platform you're listening to this on. Other affiliated links will also be available. This was your host, Mina Yildiz, and I hope to see you next time.